Fans expected a comeback album. They expected Drake to come out swinging, address the Kendrick situation, prove he still belongs at the top, and move on. That was the plan in everyone's head going into tonight. What they got was something they were not expecting at all. Before the album even finished playing, people had already stopped talking about the rap beef and started sending prayers to a 70-year-old man in Toronto. And if you want to understand why this album hit the way it did, that right there tells you everything. The ICEMAN Episode 4 livestream goes live. Toronto is already electric. The CN Tower has projections running on it. People are gathered outside and online. It feels like half the internet is watching the same screen at the same time. Everyone is waiting for the first song. It's called Make Them Cry. And from the first verse, you can tell this is not the Drake that opens an album by reminding you how much money he has. He's talking about growing up as an only child, about having to be the emotional backbone for his mother while also raising his own son, about sitting in therapy sessions and still not being able to fully face himself. He even raps that sometimes the only place he sees himself clearly is in his therapist's glasses, because he can't look directly at the mirror on his own dot. That alone would have been a lot. But then the song gets to its last few lines, and Drake says something that makes the chat go completely quiet. My dad got cancer right now. We battling stages. Trust me when I say there's plenty things I'd rather be facing. His father, Dennis Graham, has cancer, and he just said it in the first song. On the first night, no announcement before it, no warning, nothing. Just the truth sitting right there in the middle of a verse. If you know Drake's story, you know that Dennis Graham is not a straightforward figure in his life. Drake has spoken about his father's absence in his childhood more than once over the years. Growing up in Toronto, being raised mostly by his mother Sandy, learning to deal with a father who wasn't consistently around, that thread runs through so much of his music, even when it's not the main subject. But in the last few years, things between them visibly shifted. Dennis started showing up more. You'd see them together at events. Dennis posting about his son on Instagram with a kind of pride that felt genuine. Two people who had a complicated past quietly deciding to not let that past be the whole story. And while that was happening, while they were in the middle of rebuilding something, cancer came into the picture. Drake put it in the first track because it was clearly the heaviest thing on his mind walking into this album. Not his streaming numbers, not what people were saying about him online, not the lawsuit. His dad, shortly before the full album dropped at midnight, Dennis Graham posted a photo on his Instagram. Just the two of them hugging. Short caption. Nothing dramatic. Within minutes, the comments were full of people who had never met this man leaving messages for him like they knew him personally. That reaction says something. When a song feels real enough, the people in it start to feel real to the listener too. Drake didn't have to share this. A lot of artists would have kept something like a parent's illness completely private, and nobody would have blamed them. Drake has always written music that lives very close to whatever is actually happening in his life. And right now, what's actually happening in his life includes watching his father fight cancer while simultaneously trying to rebuild their relationship. That combination, the grief and the reconciliation happening at the same time, is what made that line land the way it did. It wasn't just sad. It was complicated in the way real life is complicated. And that's the part that hit people hardest. Here's something that didn't fully sink in until tonight actually started playing out. ICEMAN is not just an album with some music videos attached to it later. It was officially confirmed in the event description. This is a visual album. Every track has its own visual piece, and the whole thing was designed to be experienced together, not separately. The event description put it this way. The visual album unfolds as a theatrical interpretation of Drake's thoughts and experiences over the past 2 years. 2 years. That's how long he's been carrying all of this. The way tonight was set up made more sense once you understood that. The CN Tower covered in projections. Sound engineers all over the waterfront. Episode 4 of the live stream functioning as a world premiere where people watched the whole album play out visually in real time before it even hit streaming platforms at midnight. You weren't just getting new music, you were watching Drake's version of a film about the last 2 years of his life. Visual albums are rare for a reason. They're genuinely difficult to pull off. You're not making music and then finding visuals to match it afterward. You're building both things together so they breathe the same way. When it works, a song never sounds the same again without the image attached to it. When it doesn't work, the whole thing feels forced. What's interesting about Drake doing this specifically for ICEMAN is the subject matter he was working with. Cancer, betrayal, fatherhood, a public loss that still hasn't fully been processed by the culture. These are things that music can carry, but visuals give them a physical space to exist in. A face, a location, a specific moment in time. The visual album format also explains some of the more unusual choices in tonight's rollout. DJ Academics and Shane Gillis, both having cameos in the visual content. It's not a regular music video strategy. It's a world Drake built around this album, with characters and textures that go beyond just the songs themselves. People in Toronto who were near the CN Tower tonight were watching pieces of that world play out in real time on the side of a building. That's a different kind of album release. Whether every part of it worked is something people will be discussing for weeks. The decision to present ICEMAN this way, not as a playlist, but as a complete visual experience, tells you how seriously Drake took this project after 2 years away from solo music. Before tonight, the conversation around ICEMAN was carrying a lot of weight. Drake hadn't dropped a solo album since 2023. In the time between then and now, he went through the Kendrick situation, a legal battle with his label, years of people questioning whether he still had what it takes at this stage of his career. The anticipation around ICEMAN wasn't just excitement, it was also pressure, real pressure. Fans had specific things they needed from this project, and those expectations shaped how people were going into tonight. The first thing people wanted was for Drake to be honest about the Kendrick situation, not to spend the whole album rehashing it, but to acknowledge it in a way that felt real, pretending that battle never happened, or approaching it with total indifference, would have felt dishonest coming from an artist whose entire brand is built on emotional transparency. People wanted to hear something that made it clear he had actually sat with what happened and processed it, not just moved past it. The second thing was hunger. One of the quiet concerns about Drake in recent years was whether the comfort of his position had taken something away from his music. There's a version of Drake that is clearly coasting, and fans have felt that before. Going into ICEMAN, people wanted the version of him that sounds like he has something to prove, not manufactured intensity, but the kind of energy that comes from genuinely needing the album to land. Third, vulnerability without it feeling calculated. Drake has done vulnerability well before. There's a version of it that starts to feel like a formula, designed to generate a specific emotional reaction from the audience. People wanted real cracks this time. Real admission that things had been hard, that he hadn't handled everything perfectly, that the last 2 years had cost him something. The kind of honesty that feels slightly too personal to be comfortable. Fourth, an album that felt like a complete body of work. Not a collection of songs released at the same time. An actual album, the kind where the beginning and the end feel connected. Where the tracklist has a shape to it, where you can feel someone's specific emotional journey across the runtime. Drake has made albums like that before, and people wanted that craft back. And fifth, something that made loyal fans feel like the investment was worth it. This is the hardest one to put into words, but it was probably the most common feeling. After everything, after the losses and the discourse and the culture shifting around him, fans who had stuck around through all of it just wanted this album to remind them why they were there in the first place. Something new that felt like it came from the same person they had connected with years ago. From what dropped tonight, ICEMAN reached for all 5 of those things. Whether it hit every one of them cleanly is still being worked out in real time. But it clearly tried, and it tried in a way that felt genuine rather than strategic. The build-up to tonight didn't start tonight. It started on a random evening a few months back when Academics was doing a live stream and almost casually pressed play on something he'd been sitting on for a few days. A Drake snippet, a verse, just long enough to catch fire. The timing was what made it messy. It landed on the exact same night J. Cole dropped his long-awaited album. Cole fans were deep into celebrating that release, And then academics dropped this clip, and suddenly two completely different conversations were happening. Simultaneously. What was in the snippet was the reason people couldn't let it go. Drake was rapping about the word greatest, specifically how he felt about that word getting used for artists he didn't put in the same category as himself. He talked about people around him who acted like supporters but were quietly working against him, calling them double agents. And then he said something about his label that made people sit up. He talked about giving 15 years of his soul to a label and what that actually cost him. 15 years is a specific number. You don't say 15 years and mean it loosely. That's a man counting. That's someone who has spent a long time building something enormous for an institution that doesn't fully belong to him, and who was finally putting that reality into words on a record. The comment sections went deep into it immediately. People were pulling the bars apart line by line, debating whose specific parts were aimed at, arguing about what it meant for the album's tone overall. That reframing mattered. Academics later came out and explained that he hadn't gotten the snippet from Drake directly. He had it from another source, held it for a few days, and made his own call to air it. Drake apparently was not happy about it. Academics acknowledged that, but his position was that material he obtained independently was his to share, and he stuck to it. The fact that it landed on Cole's release night added another layer of chaos to the whole thing. Some people thought it was intentional, a way to pull attention during a competitor's big moment. Academics pushed back on that, saying the timing was not coordinated. But in hip-hop, the timing of things like this never fully leaves the conversation, no matter what anyone says afterward. What that snippet actually accomplished, beyond the initial controversy, was giving people a preview of who Drake was walking into ICEMAN as: not defensive, not apologetic, not trying to manage how people perceived him. The bars sounded like someone who had spent a year being quiet, not because they were beaten, but because they were building.